were willing to come forward and to explain what happened.
And Mr. Collins, I'll ask you and Mr. Raskin the same question. I mean, was the president's call with President Zelensky perfect, as the president has said, and was it appropriate for him to ask another country to investigate an American citizen?
There was nothing, I've said this before, there's nothing wrong with the call. And then when you look at it, and again, frankly, the problem we're having right now is exactly the last 15 minutes of this. Great oratory on a lot of things that mean nothing to this actual impeachment. I mean, we get down to the bottom line here, and I'm just leave it at that. Let him answer that question. I'll get back to it later, because everything that's been thrown out here is exactly what the problem we've had in the discussion. And this idea of throwing law and fact, we've disproven the facts. We've talked about the law wasn't broken. They didn't put it in the Constitution. So I can yell on both of them. I can talk about both of them. The problem we have here is this is the very problem we have. And I'll just address one thing before I let it back, or if you want me to switch right now, I will.
No, I mean, that's
okay.
fine. Mr.
I'll give it to him.
I mean, yeah, that's fine. I mean, I'm looking at, the president and the transcripts. I would like you to do us a favor, though. I mean, do you think it was a perfect call?
Well, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman actually said it was perfectly okay for the president to ask for political call, and I can actually, that was in his testimony.
And do you think it's appropriate?
So he said, Lieutenant Colonel Vindman said, would it ever be U.S. policy in your experience to ask a foreign leader to open a political investigation? He replied, certainly, the president is well within his right to do that.
I mean, do you think it's right for the president to ask a foreign government to investigate a U.S. citizen like that?
No, I think it's absolutely wrong. And, one of the interesting things about the hearings, of course, was that every single I think every single member of Congress who has at least endorsed the impeachment inquiry has said that it's completely wrong for the U.S. president to use any of the means at his disposal to drag foreign governments into our election. And we were unable to get our colleagues on the Judiciary Committee to weigh in on that, saying, let's assume that let's stipulate you think that the president did nothing wrong here. Do you think it's wrong for the president of the United States to get foreign powers involved in an election? And we couldn't get an answer. I reissued the invitation to Mr. Collins because I believe that in his heart he thinks that's wrong. And I certainly would not want that to become the pattern for all future presidencies.
I think the interesting thing here, Mr. Chairman, if I could, I don't want this to become the pattern for future impeachments. I think this is the problem I have. And the understanding here is, I guess it's okay, though, to get involved in a 2016 election when you pay a third party to go pay for a dossier. I mean, these are the kind of things that we can talk about, but the interesting issue that is just discussed here is exactly where we are right now in a question and a comment, because what Mr. Raskin just brought up is an interesting point. So is it okay if you're running for president that you can't be investigated, even if you did something overseas? So if you were running for president and you did something overseas, it would be off limits, according to Mr. Raskin's argument, for the United States government to investigate that. That's the argument he just set up. I think you need to be very careful with that argument.
I appreciate, I guess, again, I mentioned this in my opening statement, the frustrating thing is that it's hard. I mean, it would seem so obvious to so many of us about inappropriate behavior, we can't even get. I mean, I look at, our former colleague Charlie Dent says he's spoken with Republicans who are absolutely disgusted and exhausted by the president's behavior. Another former Republican colleague of ours, David Jolly, said we've witnessed, quote, an impeachable moment. Former Republican Congressman Reed Ribble of Wisconsin said clearly there was some type of quid pro quo. When asked if he believes the testimony presented warrants impeachment, he said, I do. Former South Carolina Republican Bob Inglis, who served on the Judiciary Committee during the Clinton impeachment, said last month in a tweet, without a doubt, if Barack Obama had done the things revealed in the testimony in the current inquiry, we Republicans would have impeached him. Joe Scarborough, a former Republican congressman from Florida, said every Republican knows that Donald Trump was asking for dirt on Joe Biden in exchange for releasing military funds. I mean, I get. Well, let's go on to. I don't know. Do you want to respond, Mr. Raskin?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. But one thing, I've just passed a note saying I may have gotten the numbers wrong. The Department of Defense had a $250 million appropriation for the purposes of aiding Ukraine, and the state had 141 million. I may have misspoken and said 200 million. But as to that point, I feel for my friends because I think they're put into a situation, put into a box, so to speak, which was what President Trump was quoted as saying about what he wanted to do with President Zelensky. He wanted him in a box about his statements. But I think they're put into something of a corner here because the president has declared his conduct perfect, absolutely perfect, and he can do whatever he wants. And so they are unable to say, to make the case that I would make is if I were trying to defend the president, I would say, okay, that was totally wrong and off limits, but it's not impeachable for X, Y, and Z reasons. But they're not allowing anybody that space to say it. They must go with the president's assertion that this was categorically correct. There was nothing wrong with it. It was perfectly right. And, you know, he quoted legal scholars. He didn't name them, but he invoked legal scholars who told him that the call was perfect as well.
And I kind of want to move my questioning along here a little bit. So let me ask you on the issue of obstruction of Congress. Why is obstruction of Congress an impeachable offense?
Well, look, and this is something Mr. Collins made a really important point, which is that we've got to think about this in institutional terms, okay? And he rightly calls us to redouble our commitment to fairness in the process. I've seen lots of fairness in this process. I've seen in the closed-door depositions, I saw the Democratic counsel get an hour. I saw the Republican counsel get an hour. I saw the Democratic members get to question. I saw the Republican members get to question. I have seen this committee bend over backwards to get all of the depositions out as quickly as possible, while the President of the United States is stopping at least 7 witnesses from coming forward. It may be more than that, but he has blockaded witnesses. The President, who says the process is unfair, is the one who's stopping everybody from coming to testify and is essentially trying to blockade the whole investigation. Look, why is this essential, Mr. Chairman? It's essential because for institutional reasons. It's essential for institutional reasons because in the future, it might be a majority Democratic Congress, it might be a majority Republican Congress, but in any event, it's Congress. And one of our jobs is, as members of Congress, is to make sure that the president does not violate the laws. We're supposed to stand sentinel to make sure that the president will only enforce the laws, take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Well, what happens if you get a president who totally trashes the law? Okay? Some of us think we may be there now. I know some of our colleagues don't believe that, but certainly they can imagine a situation where a president advertises spectacular disrespect and contempt for the law and trashes the law. What is our ultimate check against that? It's going to be impeachment. That's why it's in the Constitution. But now we have a president who, for the first time in American history, says, I am going to try to block the ability of Congress to impeach me by not turning over one single document, by trying to hold back people from testifying, like Secretary Pompeo, like Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, like multiple other members of the administration. I don't want them to come forward to testify. And so we're going to have to use our common sense to derive conclusions about what that means. What does our common sense tell us when you have all these other people who are coming forward and testifying about the misconduct of the president, and then the president trying to block everybody else from coming forward to testify in his administration?
And let me just point out for the record,